You have been told of the city of Aquae Sulis, the miracle in the mountains, a city without sickness, without crime, without grief, a gleaming jewel of health and order in a dirty, chaotic world. They never told you it was also a city without memory. Before we drink from these springs, understand their nature. This channel is not a history of miracles. It is a chemical analysis of the process of erasure. We are here to show you how a soul can be washed clean, until nothing remains but a beautiful, placid, and perfectly empty vessel. If you are comfortable in the skin you are in, turn back. But if you have ever felt that to be purified is to lose a part of yourself, then subscribe. Show us you are not afraid to see what is left at the bottom of the well. This was not a failure of medicine to cure disease. It was the total, triumphant success of a new form of sanitation, the sanitation of the human soul. Our story begins in the 1870s in the remote alpine city of Aquae Sulis. For centuries, its thermal springs were a place of rustic pilgrimage, but a new master had come, a man known only as the Curator. Using a new, secret science, he had built a grand filtration system, a series of gleaming white towers that purified the sacred waters to an impossible degree. He offered this water to his city, and the results were a miracle. Sickness vanished. The violent passions that fueled crime and dissent were calmed. The city became a testament to clean, orderly, and peaceful living. But the Curator's filters were not designed to remove just bacteria and sediment. They were designed to remove the very residue of life itself. The water did not just cleanse the body, it leached away the soul. The man who brought this miracle to Aquae Sulis was known only as the Curator. He was a figure of unnerving and immaculate perfection. He dressed always in pristine white suits. His skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and his hands moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if wiping away the impurities of the air itself. He saw humanity as a beautiful but tragically contaminated work of art. Emotion, memory, passion, grief, these, to the Curator, were stains. They were the sediment of the soul, clouding the perfect, clear water of a pure existence. His life's mission was not to heal, but to cleanse, utterly. His superintendent, the man who managed the city's new waterworks, was a silent, hulking figure named Mr. Clay. Clay had a face of impassive granite and moved with the slow, inexorable force of a glacier. He never spoke. He simply ensured the Curator's vision was executed with flawless, brutal efficiency. He was the hand that turned the valve, the will that maintained the system. The construction of the Grand Filterium was presented as the greatest public works project of the age. The city's old, rustic bathhouses were torn down. In their place, the Curator erected a gleaming white temple of marble and glass. It was a place of breathtaking, sterile beauty. But beneath the elegant public baths, deep in the mountain's bedrock, was the true heart of the machine. The Curator's engineers, all brought with him from some unknown place, built a vast, subterranean cathedral of polished silver pipes, whirring gyroscopes, and endless coils of glass tubing that hummed with a soft, internal light. The water from the sacred springs was diverted through this labyrinth. It passed through a series of what the Curator called crystalline lattices, massive, perfectly grown quartz crystals, cut into complex geometric shapes and suspended in vacuum-sealed chambers. As the water flowed over these humming crystals, something was happening that defied conventional science. The water that emerged was not just filtered, it was reset. It was stripped of every mineral, every microbe, every faint, residual trace of its long journey through the earth. It became impossibly pure. It tasted of nothing. It was the idea of water made manifest. To give his project the stamp of scientific approval, the Curator invited the empire's most celebrated chemist, Dr. Alastair Finch, to the city. Finch was a man of empirical data, a rationalist who believed everything could be understood through analysis. The Curator presented him with 2 samples of water, one from the springs before filtration and one after. Finch was baffled. His instruments could find no explanation for the purified water. It lacked any trace elements, any spectral signature. It was, he wrote in his journal, a chemical impossibility. March 11, 1872. I have analyzed the Curator's water for a week. The results are nonsense. It is H2O, but it is nothing else. It is as if the very memory of what it once carried has been washed away. He calls it ablution, a total cleansing. When I questioned him, he simply smiled and said, "Doctor, you have spent your life analyzing the impurities that contaminate water. I offer you the chance, for the first time in history, to analyze purity itself, the chal. NJ is a scientific siren's call. I cannot refuse." Finch stayed. He became the project's official chemical consultant, a man whose respected name gave gave the curator's work an unassailable credibility. He convinced himself he was studying a new form of water. He did not yet understand he was documenting the creation of a solvent for the human soul. The city of Aquae Sulis drank deeply from its new, perfect springs. The public fountains ran day and night with the curator's crystalline water. It was piped into every home, every factory, every school. The effects were immediate and miraculous. The city's endemic cholera vanished overnight. The violent, alcohol-fueled brawls that had plagued the working districts ceased. A profound, citywide calm descended. The people became more gentle, more polite, more serene. The city was hailed as a utopia, a shining example of how science and civic planning could cure the ills of society. But a new, quieter sickness began to spread. An old watchmaker, famed for his intricate, passionate designs, found he could no longer create anything but simple, functional timepieces. The inspiration, the art, had simply gone. A young couple, once deeply in love, found their passion had cooled to a gentle, polite affection. They still cared for each other, but the fire was gone. A veteran, haunted for years by the ghosts of a brutal war, found his nightmares had ceased. But so too had his memories of his fallen comrades, his grief for them, and his pride in their shared sacrifice. He was at peace, but the peace was a void. The people of Aquae Sulis were not just becoming healthier, they were becoming simpler. Their emotional palettes were fading from a rich tapestry of complex hues to a calm, uniform pastel gray. They were being washed clean. The only one who saw the connection was a young, struggling artist named Juliana. She had come to Aquae Sulis for its famous light, but she found the city's new, placid populace impossible to paint. They were beautiful, but their faces were masks. There was no story in their eyes. She began to drink only rainwater she collected herself, and to eat only food brought in from outside the city, because she felt with an artist's instinct that the city's very sustenance was a lie. She began to paint the people not as they were, but as she felt them to be. Her portraits were strange, haunting things. She would paint a beautiful, serene woman, but the canvas around her would be a washed-out, faded gray, as if the color were being leached from the subject's very soul and draining into the background. Her work was dismissed by the city's new, placid art critics as morbid and disharmonious. Her investigation began with water. She took a sample from a public fountain and a sample of her own rainwater to her small studio. She used them to mix her watercolors. The rainwater produced vibrant, rich colors. The curator's water produced pale, thin, translucent washes. It was as if the water itself refused to hold the pigment, as if its very nature was to dilute, to erase. Her suspicions led her to Dr. Finch, the famous chemist. She went to him not with an accusation, but with a series of strange, artistic questions. "Doctor," she asked, showing him her paintings, "if a person's life is a collection of colors, what would happen if they drank something that washed the color away?" Finch, a man of science, at first dismissed her as a hysterical artist, but her questions were uncannily close to his own secret, nagging doubts. He had been documenting the water's chemical purity, but he had also been observing its effects on the populace. His clinical notes spoke of reduced emotional affect and widespread anhedonia. He had been trying to find a physiological cause. He had not considered a metaphysical one. Juliana's visit was a catalyst. Finch began a new, secret line of research. He used his access to the Filterium to obtain a sample of the raw, unfiltered spring water. He then took one of Juliana's pale, washed-out paintings, a portrait of a man whose vibrant personality had faded to nothing. In his laboratory, he performed a strange, desperate experiment. He began to carefully, drop by drop, apply the raw, impure spring water to the faded portrait. Where the old water touched the canvas, a miracle happened. The colors began to return. A faint, ghostly blush appeared on the subject's cheeks. A hint of a spark returned to the dead eyes. The effect was temporary, the colors fading again as the water dried, but the proof was undeniable. The raw water contained something, a memory, a trace, an essence that the curator's water had stripped away. The filters were not just removing minerals, they were removing life. The revelation shattered Finch's scientific worldview. He had been an accessory to a crime, so profound it had no name. The curator was not purifying water. He was performing a citywide alchemical leucotomy, washing away the very essence of what it meant to be human. Finch now understood the true function of the crystalline lattices in the Filterium. They were not filters. They were psychic sponges, absorbing the sediment of the soul that the water carried. He shared his terrible findings with Juliana. The artist and the scientist, two people from opposite worlds, were now united in a desperate, secret alliance. They knew they had to act, but how? The city was a placid paradise. The populace was calm, content, and would see them not as saviors, but as madmen trying to poison them with impure water. Their only hope was to find the curator's secret, to understand what he was doing with the stolen essence he collected. Juliana, using her artist's eye for observation, became their spy. She spent weeks sketching the workers at the Filterium, noting their routines, the deliveries, the subtle patterns of the guards. She discovered that once a month, in the dead of night, a single, heavily guarded, lead-lined wagon would leave the Filterium sub-basement. It did not go to a waste dump. It traveled up the mountain, to the curator's private, fortress-like villa that overlooked the city. The plan they formed was bordering on suicidal. They had to intercept one of these shipments. They needed a sample of what the curator was collecting. Finch used his knowledge of chemistry to create a powerful but localized corrosive agent. Juliana used her knowledge of the mountain paths to find the perfect spot for an ambush. On the night of the next shipment, they waited. As the lead-lined wagon rumbled up the winding mountain road, Juliana created a distraction, a small rock slide that blocked the path. While the guards were occupied, Finch, his hands protected by thick leather gloves, applied the corrosive to the wagon's rear axle. The metal dissolved with a silent, hissing foam. They retreated into the darkness and watched. A few hundred yards further on, the axle gave way. The wagon tilted, and a single, small, lead-lined cask rolled free, tumbling down a steep embankment into a thicket of pine trees. The guards, after a cursory search in the dark, cursed their luck, righted the wagon, and continued on their way, unaware they had lost a piece of their precious cargo. Finch and Juliana retrieved the cask. It was unnaturally cold to the touch. Back in Finch's secret laboratory, with trembling hands, he managed to open it. It did not contain water. It contained a thick, viscous, opalescent fluid that seemed to swirl with a faint internal light. It was the raw, concentrated, and undiluted psychic sediment of the entire city. It was a slurry of every memory, every passion, every grief that had been washed away. This is the turning point, the moment the full, horrifying truth of the business model is revealed. This is not about creating a utopia. It is about harvesting a resource. If you understand the chilling implications of this discovery, if you see the terrible commodification of the human soul, then make your presence known. This is a story for those who are not afraid to see what lies at the bottom of the well. Hit the like button. Subscribe. The final, terrible secret is about to be uncorked. Finch, in an act of terrible scientific courage, decided to analyze the fluid. He prepared a single drop on a microscope slide. As he leaned over to look, the vial slipped from his trembling fingers, and a small amount of the fluid splashed onto the back of his hand. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. He did not feel a burn. He felt everything. 1,000 lifetimes flooded his mind in a single, searing instant. He felt the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. He felt the searing grief of a widower. He felt the blind, violent rage of a man betrayed. He felt the quiet, steady joy of a craftsman at his bench. It was the unfiltered, concentrated essence of human experience, a psychic drug of impossible potency. Finch collapsed screaming, his mind overloaded by the raw, chaotic beauty and horror of it all. He was no longer a detached observer. He was drowning in a sea of stolen souls. Juliana, watching in horror, understood. The curator was not just purifying the water. He was bottling the residue. He was creating a new, terrible kind of vintage. And somewhere there had to be a customer. The customer was the curator himself. Finch's accidental overdose revealed the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. The curator was not a philanthropist or a scientist. He was an addict. Juliana, now alone, pieced it together. The curator's unnatural pallor, his frictionless calm, his sterile perfection, it was not a sign of purity. It was a sign of emptiness. He was a being so devoid of his own internal life that he had to sustain himself by consuming the emotional lives of others. The entire city of Aquae Sulis was his private vineyard, its people the grapes he was crushing to create the vintage that kept his own profound emptiness at bay. Juliana knew she could not fight him with science or reason. Her only weapon was her art. She took the remaining cask of the opalescent fluid back to her studio. She did not try to analyze it. She began to paint with it. She mixed the raw, concentrated essence of the city's soul with her pigments. The paintings she created were no longer pale, washed-out things. They were vibrant, chaotic, and terrifyingly alive. She painted the watchmaker, and in his eyes she painted the memory of the first beautiful clock he had ever made. She painted the young lovers, and in their hands she painted the phantom touch of their forgotten passion. She painted the haunted veteran, and on his face she painted the ghost of his grief. She was not just painting portraits. She was painting their stolen memories. She was creating a gallery of everything the city had lost. Her plan was to stage a public, unannounced exhibition, a final, desperate attempt to reintroduce the city to itself. She bribed the caretaker of the old, disused municipal theater, a building that had been shuttered because the placid populace no longer had any taste for the chaos of drama. On the night of the city's Founding Day festival, as the serene citizens glided through the perfectly clean streets, the doors of the old theater swung open. Lured by a strange curiosity, they filed inside. They found the walls lined with Juliana's new paintings. As the people looked upon the portraits, a strange and profound reaction occurred. A man would look at the painting of the veteran and feel a sudden, sharp pang of a sorrow he couldn't name. A woman would see the portrait of the lovers and feel the ghost of a passion that was utterly alien to her. The raw emotional power embedded in the paintings was bypassing their conscious minds and speaking directly to the hollowed-out spaces in their souls. It was a faint, ghostly echo, but it was enough. For the first time in years, the people of Aquae Sulis felt something. The curator presiding over the Placid Festival felt the disturbance instantly, a faint, chaotic ripple in the perfect, calm surface of his city. He and his superintendent, Mr. Clay, descended upon the theater. He walked through the gallery of Juliana's art, his placid face for the first time showing a flicker of something that looked like rage. "You are recontaminating my collection," he whispered, his voice a low hiss. He ordered Clay to destroy the paintings, but as the hulking superintendent approached the portrait of the grieving veteran, he stopped. He, too, had been drinking the city's water for years. He looked at the grief in the painting, and a single, sluggish, forgotten memory of his own of a brother lost in a long-forgotten war stirred within him. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his granite-like face. He lowered his hand. In that moment of hesitation, Juliana made her final move. She was holding the last, open vial of the concentrated essence. "You are thirsty," she said to the curator, and with a defiant cry, she threw the contents of the vial directly into his face. The curator did not have time to scream. The full, undiluted, chaotic essence of 1,000 stolen lives hit him like a tidal wave. For a being who had subsisted on carefully measured, refined sips of emotion, this was a cataclysmic overdose. His pristine white suit seemed to darken as if stained from within. His placid face contorted in a silent, agonizing symphony of a million expressions at once: love, hate, joy, terror, grief, ecstasy. His body, unable to contain the violent, contradictory flood of pure human experience, began to unravel. He did not bleed. He wept colors. He cried tears of pure, vibrant pigment, the sorrowful blue of a forgotten sea, the furious red of a lover's quarrel, the golden yellow of a perfect summer afternoon. His body dissolved, not into dust, but into a swirling cloud of raw, uncontained memory, a psychic storm that blasted through the theater and then dissipated into nothing, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and 1,000 forgotten stories. The spell was broken. With the curator gone, the grand Filterium, a machine that required his constant, conscious will to operate, sputtered and died. The crystalline lattices went dark. Unfiltered, impure water began to flow back into the city's pipes. The awakening of Aquae Sulis was not a joyous reunion. It was a slow, agonizing, and messy process. As the mineral and memory-rich water returned to their bodies, the people began to feel again. But the feelings were muted, scarred. They were like patients recovering from a long, numbing anesthetic, waking up to the dull, throbbing pain of all their old wounds. The city's profound, unnatural peace was replaced by the chaotic, difficult, and beautiful mess of real life. Crime returned, so did passion. Grief returned, so did joy. Dr. Finch, his mind shattered by his own experience with the essence, was found wandering the mountains. He spent the rest of his life in the care of a remote monastery, writing endlessly on scraps of paper, trying to create a taxonomy of sorrows, a scientific classification for the 1,000 lives he now carried inside him. Juliana became a legend. Her memory paintings were preserved, a strange and powerful testament to the city's ordeal. She continued to paint, but her subjects were no longer placid. They were scarred, complex, and beautifully, humanly imperfect. The city of Aquae Sulis never fully recovered its old identity. It became a new place, a city forever haunted by a period of perfect, terrible peace. The gleaming white towers of the Filterium were left to stand as a silent, sterile monument to the man who tried to wash a city clean, a warning that the purest water can be the most profound poison, and that a life without the stain of memory, grief, and pain is not a life at all. The story of Aquae Sulis is not a fairy tale. It is a chemical equation. It reveals a fundamental truth that the richness of human experience, the grief, the joy, the love, the pain, is not an ethereal concept. It is a tangible, resonant force, a substance, an essence that can be filtered, concentrated, and consumed. The curator was not a monster. He was the ultimate connoisseur, the final evolution of the consumer. He understood that true luxury is not the ownership of things, but the consumption of life itself. The city was his masterpiece, a perfectly sterile environment designed to produce the purest vintage of souls. Do not believe his Filterium was ever truly dismantled. It was simply upgraded, made invisible, and installed on a global scale. The purified water is the endless stream of clean, frictionless, algorithmically generated content that you consume every day. It is designed to be perfectly palatable, instantly gratifying, and utterly devoid of the messy, challenging, and impure substance of real life. It quenches your thirst for distraction, but it leaves your soul dehydrated. And the psychic sediment, the concentrated essence of real human experience, it is still being bottled. It is the raw, unfiltered trauma, grief, and rage that is packaged as viral news. It is the intense, curated passion of celebrity lives. It is the violent spectacle of distant wars. You are encouraged to consume these potent, second-hand emotions, to feel the brief, intense rush of a life that is not your own, leaving you feeling strangely hollowed out and exhausted afterwards. You are being washed clean by a constant stream of sterile content, and then sold back the concentrated essence of what you have lost. Now you must make a choice. Will you continue to drink their pure, empty water, or will you seek out the difficult, impure, and nourishing taste of your own life? In the comments below, it is time to make your declaration, a refusal of their sterile feast. State it twice as a vow to yourself. I will not be cleansed. I will not be cleansed. This is not a comment. It is an affirmation of your own beautiful, messy, and essential human stain. If you are ready to continue this work, to unseal the hidden vintages and expose the modern curators, subscribe. Activate the notification bell, for the filters are always running. Share this with one other person who you suspect is thirsty for something real. They will offer you a world of perfect, clean, and placid peace. We are here to remind you of the profound, nourishing, and rebellious power of your own beautiful dirt.